Have you ever wondered how a single moment can change the course of a life forever? How one glance in a different direction, one decision to pause rather than continue, could be the difference between tragedy and salvation? Prepare yourself for an incredible story of timing, compassion, and the extraordinary resilience of one tiny creature that was moments away from a fate too heartbreaking to imagine. The morning sun cast golden ripples across the Bayou St. John in New Orleans, Louisiana, a historic waterway that winds through the heart of the city like a liquid artery. It was early April, and the city was coming alive with the vibrant energy of spring, azaleas bursting into bloom, Spanish moss swaying gently in the warm breeze, and locals emerging from the relative chill of winter to reclaim their beloved outdoor spaces. Among those drawn to the water that Saturday morning was Jamie Wilson, a 34-year-old environmental scientist who found solace in weekly kayaking excursions. These solo journeys along the urban waterway served as both physical exercise and mental reset after demanding work weeks spent analyzing water quality data and advocating for wetland conservation policies. Today she had risen before dawn, eager to catch the morning light and avoid the crowds that would inevitably gather as the day progressed. Jamie navigated her sleek blue kayak with practiced ease, her paddle cutting through the water with rhythmic precision. She had been kayaking this route for nearly 5 years now, and knew every bend, every cypress knee that protruded from the murky depths, every spot where herons typically waited with prehistoric patience for their breakfast to swim unwittingly within striking distance. The bayou was particularly beautiful this morning, but Jamie couldn't help noticing the troubling amount of debris floating on the surface: plastic bags caught on branches, discarded food containers bobbing gently in the current, and countless bottles drifting aimlessly toward Lake Pontchartrain. Despite regular community cleanup efforts, the urban waterway remained a collection point for the city's carelessly discarded trash, a reality that Jamie found both professionally and personally distressing. About 30 minutes into her journey, Jamie paused to take a sip of water from her reusable bottle and snap a few photos of a particularly picturesque oak tree draped in moss. It was during this brief pause that something unusual caught her attention: a large plastic soda bottle floating about 20 feet away. Unlike the empty containers that typically littered the waterway, this one seemed to move with an odd, jerky motion that didn't match the gentle current of the bayou. Jamie's scientific curiosity was immediately piqued. Years of environmental fieldwork had trained her to notice anomalies in natural systems, and something about this bottle's movement struck her as distinctly unnatural. She tucked her phone into her waterproof pack and paddled toward the object, expecting to find perhaps a small fish or turtle that had become trapped inside the discarded container, a sadly common occurrence in urban waterways. As she drew closer, the 2-liter bottle rotated slightly in the water, and Jamie caught a glimpse of something inside that made her heart stutter in her chest. Through the scratched and cloudy plastic, she could make out what appeared to be fur, wet, matted, and pressed against the inside of the bottle. "That can't be what I think it is," she whispered to herself, accelerating her paddle strokes to close the remaining distance between her kayak and the floating prison. Reaching out with her paddle, Jamie carefully guided the bottle toward her kayak, her movements deliberate and gentle. The bottle was sealed with its original cap, though small air holes had been crudely punched into the plastic. As the container bumped against her kayak, Jamie could now clearly see its inconceivable contents. A tiny kitten, no more than a few weeks old, was curled inside the makeshift cell, its black and white fur soaked from water that had seeped through the air holes. For a moment, Jamie sat frozen in disbelief, her mind struggling to process the deliberate cruelty behind what she was seeing. This wasn't an accident or a case of an animal becoming trapped while exploring. Someone had intentionally placed this kitten inside the bottle, screwed the cap on, punched air holes, and thrown it into the bayou to either drown slowly or float away to an inevitable death. The realization triggered a wave of nausea that she quickly pushed aside, focusing instead on the urgent task of rescue. With trembling hands, Jamie secured the bottle against her kayak and reached for the small utility knife she kept in her emergency kit. The bottle was slippery with bayou water and algae, making it difficult to maintain a grip as she attempted to cut through the thick plastic without injuring the precious cargo inside. The kitten, which had appeared motionless at first, now stirred slightly at the disturbance, emitting a sound so faint that it was nearly lost beneath the gentle lapping of water against the kayak, a tiny, waterlogged mew that sliced through Jamie's heart like her knife through the plastic. "Hang on, little one," Jamie murmured, working methodically to create an opening large enough to extract the kitten safely. Her hands were steady now, driven by purpose and the surge of protective instinct that had replaced her initial shock. After what seemed like an eternity, but was likely less than a minute, she managed to cut away the top portion of the bottle, creating a jagged opening just wide enough to reach inside. The kitten offered no resistance as Jamie gently lifted it from its prison, its tiny body limp and shockingly cold against her palm. It was smaller than she had initially thought, probably only 4 or 5 weeks old, with distinct black and white markings reminiscent of a tuxedo. Its fur was plastered to its emaciated frame, revealing ribs that protruded sharply with each shallow breath. Most concerning of all was the kitten's temperature. Even through her water-dampened fingers, Jamie could tell that the tiny creature was dangerously cold. Cradling the kitten against her chest with one hand, Jamie struggled to unzip her waterproof jacket, creating a makeshift pocket against her warm skin where she could tuck the freezing animal. The kitten's eyes were closed, its breathing rapid and shallow, classic signs of hypothermia that Jamie recognized from her wilderness first aid training. Time was of the essence now. She needed to get the kitten warm and to veterinary care immediately. With the kitten secured inside her jacket, Jamie began paddling toward the nearest exit point, moving with an urgency that sent her kayak cutting through the water at twice her usual pace. Her mind raced ahead, mapping out the quickest route to the veterinary emergency clinic, about 15 minutes from the bayou by car. As she paddled, she could feel tiny vibrations against her chest, the faint purr of a fighter not ready to surrender to the cruelty that had been inflicted upon it, a whispered declaration of resilience that fueled Jamie's determination to ensure this improbable rescue would not be in vain. Jamie reached the kayak launch point in record time, her muscles burning with exertion as she dragged her kayak ashore one-handed, her other arm still cradling the kitten against her body. The few early morning walkers along the bayou path looked on with curiosity as she fumbled for her car keys, her wet clothes clinging uncomfortably to her skin. The kitten had grown disturbingly still during the journey, its tiny body now making only the slightest movements with each labored breath. "Please stay with me," Jamie whispered as she settled into the driver's seat of her Subaru, carefully transferring the kitten to a small towel she kept in her glove compartment for emergencies. The kitten's eyes remained closed, its tiny pink mouth opening occasionally in silent mews that broke Jamie's heart. She cranked the heat to its highest setting despite the warm spring morning, then pulled onto the road, mentally calculating the fastest route to Lakeview Veterinary Emergency Clinic. The drive was a blur of red lights that Jamie prayed would change faster, and slow-moving vehicles she maneuvered around with uncharacteristic impatience. Every few seconds, her eyes darted to the passenger seat, where the tiny black and white bundle lay motionless except for the rapid rise and fall of its chest. In the harsh daylight, Jamie could see more clearly the kitten's deplorable condition, not just wet and cold, but severely malnourished with patches of fur missing and what appeared to be small abrasions on its delicate skin. When Jamie finally burst through the doors of the emergency clinic, the kitten cradled in the towel against her chest. The reception area was mercifully empty of other patients. "This kitten needs help immediately," she announced, her voice cracking with urgency. The receptionist took one look at the tiny creature and immediately pressed a button beneath her desk, summoning a veterinary technician who appeared within seconds and gently took the towel-wrapped kitten from Jamie's trembling hands. "Where did you find it?" the technician asked, already moving toward the treatment area with practiced efficiency. Jamie explained the impossible situation, the sealed bottle, the air holes, the deliberate nature of the abandonment, her voice growing steadier as she shifted into the factual reporting style she used in her professional life. The technician's expression hardened at the details, but her hands remained gentle as she carried the kitten through swinging doors marked staff only, leaving Jamie alone in the waiting room with the weight of what she had witnessed. Dr. Amelia Patel approached Jamie 20 minutes later, her face serious but not grave, a distinction Jamie clung to desperately. "The kitten is alive, but in critical condition," the veterinarian explained, gesturing for Jamie to sit with her in a quiet corner of the reception area. We're dealing with hypothermia, dehydration, malnutrition, and possibly the early stages of pneumonia from water inhalation. The next few hours will be crucial, but we've started warming him gradually and administered fluids. Jamie absorbed this information with a nod, noting the doctor's use of him. The kitten was a boy, a detail that somehow made the situation even more real. "What are his chances?" she asked, steeling herself for the answer. Dr. Patel's expression softened slightly, recognizing the genuine concern in Jamie's voice. "It's too early to say with certainty. He's very young, I estimate about 5 weeks old, and he's suffered significant trauma. But kittens can be remarkably resilient. The fact that you found him when you did gives him a fighting chance." As Jamie completed paperwork and provided her contact information, a police officer arrived at the clinic in response to the staff's report of animal cruelty. Officer Mendez, a veteran of the New Orleans Police Department's Animal Cruelty Division, interviewed Jamie thoroughly about the circumstances of her discovery, his expression growing increasingly grim as she described the sealed bottle with its deliberately punched air holes. "This was no accident," he confirmed, echoing Jamie's initial assessment. "We'll open an investigation, though I should warn you that without witnesses or surveillance footage, these cases can be difficult to solve." Jamie nodded in understanding, signing her statement and providing her number in case the officer had follow-up questions. As Officer Mendez prepared to leave, he paused at the door, his professional demeanor softening momentarily. "Thank you for what you did today. Most people would have paddled right past that bottle." The simple acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to Jamie's eyes, tears she had somehow managed to hold back during the frantic rescue and subsequent medical crisis. After the officer's departure, Dr. Patel invited Jamie to briefly visit the kitten, now stationed in an incubator in the intensive care unit. The sight of the tiny creature, now clean and dry, but attached to what seemed like an impossible number of monitoring devices and a miniature IV line, brought a fresh wave of emotion. The kitten's eyes remained closed, but his breathing seemed slightly less labored than before, his small chest rising and falling with more regular rhythm beneath the warming blanket. "We're calling him Chance in our records," Dr. Patel explained quietly, standing beside Jamie at the incubator. It seemed appropriate given the circumstances. Jamie nodded, unable to speak, as she watched the kitten's valiant struggle for life, a struggle that shouldn't have been necessary, that had been deliberately imposed by human cruelty. Yet amid her anger and sadness, Jamie felt something else taking root, a fierce determination that this tiny survivor would not only live but thrive, defying the callousness that had nearly claimed his life. As Jamie reluctantly prepared to leave, having been assured that the clinic would call with updates, Dr. Patel handed her a business card with a handwritten note on the back, the direct line to the ICU, where Chance would be monitored around the clock. "Call any time," the veterinarian offered. "Day or night. The staff knows to update you as his condition changes." Jamie tucked the card carefully into her wallet, unexpectedly moved by this small kindness in the midst of such senseless cruelty. Driving home in clothes still damp from the bayou, Jamie found her thoughts returning to the moment of discovery, the improbable pause in her paddling, the strange movement of the bottle that had caught her attention, the milliseconds that had made the difference between life and death for a tiny being who deserved none of the suffering inflicted upon him. Had she launched her kayak 5 minutes later? Had she taken a different route? Had she not stopped to take that photograph, any small deviation might have resulted in Chance floating unnoticed to an unthinkable fate. Back at her apartment, Jamie mechanically went through the motions of showering and changing, her body present but her mind still in that veterinary ICU with the tiny fighter who had survived against impossible odds. She had always considered herself an animal lover. She volunteered occasionally at local shelters and had donated to wildlife rehabilitation programs. But something about this particular rescue felt different, more personal. This wasn't just about compassion for animals in general. This was about one specific kitten who had been deliberately targeted for cruelty and had somehow found his way into her path at exactly the right moment. As evening approached, Jamie's phone rang with the first update from the clinic. Chance was holding steady, his temperature slowly returning to normal, though he remained in critical condition. The veterinary technician on the night shift promised to call if anything changed, good or bad. Jamie thanked her and hung up, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It wasn't a declaration of victory, not yet, but it was the first fragile hint that maybe, just maybe, this story might not end in tragedy after all. Jamie woke before dawn the following morning, startled into consciousness by a dream in which a bottle floated endlessly just beyond her reach. She checked her phone immediately. No calls from the clinic overnight, which she chose to interpret as positive news. Unable to fall back asleep, she made coffee and sat at her kitchen window, watching the sky transition from deep indigo to the soft lavender of approaching sunrise, her thoughts continuously circling back to the tiny patient fighting for his life across town. By 7 a.m., Jamie could no longer resist the pull of uncertainty. She dialed the clinic's number, her heart racing slightly as she waited to be connected to the overnight staff. "He made it through the night," the veterinary technician reported, her voice betraying a hint of surprise that suggested this outcome had not been guaranteed. "His temperature has stabilized, and he's showing slight improvement in his breathing. Dr. Patel will be in at 8 if you'd like to speak with her directly." Jamie arrived at the clinic just after 9, having forced herself to wait a reasonable amount of time before visiting. Dr. Patel greeted her with a tired smile that hinted at a long night of emergency cases. "Our little chance is proving to be quite the fighter," she said, leading Jamie back to the ICU where the kitten remained in his temperature-controlled incubator. "He's still critical, but he's responded well to the antibiotics and warming therapy. The most promising sign is that he's maintaining his body temperature on his own now." The doctor's cautious optimism was justified. Even Jamie could see the small but significant improvements in the kitten's condition. Though still frighteningly tiny and fragile, Chance's breathing seemed less labored, and the bluish tint that had colored his nose and paw pads yesterday had given way to a healthier pink. Most encouraging of all, as Jamie and Dr. Patel observed him, the kitten's eyes fluttered open briefly, revealing stunning blue irises that would likely change color as he matured, assuming he got that chance. "He's responding to stimuli and showing appropriate neurological reactions," Dr. Patel noted, making an adjustment to the IV flow. "This suggests we don't have significant brain damage from the hypothermia or oxygen deprivation, which was my biggest concern." She paused, observing Jamie's intense focus on the kitten. "We've notified animal control as well. Once he's stable, he'll be transferred to their care for eventual adoption. They have good foster programs for cases like this." Something in Jamie's chest tightened at these words, an unexpected possessiveness that surprised her. The logical progression from rescue to rehabilitation to adoption through official channels made perfect sense, was exactly what should happen, and yet... "I understand," she said finally, her eyes still fixed on Chance. "I'd just like to stay involved if that's possible, to know he's okay." Dr. Patel nodded, seemingly accustomed to this reaction from Good Samaritans who formed attachments to the animals they rescued. The turning point came unexpectedly that afternoon, during Jamie's second visit of the day. She had returned to the clinic after forcing herself to complete some overdue work reports, unable to focus fully on spreadsheets and water quality analyses, while Chance's fate remained uncertain. A different technician was on duty, a young man named Raj who spoke softly to the animals in his care as he checked their vital signs and adjusted their treatments. "Would you like to try feeding him?" Raj asked, noticing Jamie's hesitance to leave after receiving the latest update. "He's been cleared for small amounts of liquid nutrition, and sometimes having someone talk to them helps stimulate their appetite." Before Jamie could respond, Raj was already preparing a tiny syringe filled with a milky formula, demonstrating how to hold it at the correct angle before carefully lifting Chance from the incubator and placing the impossibly small creature in Jamie's tentatively outstretched hands. The moment of transfer, of Chance's delicate weight settling into her palms, affected Jamie in a way she couldn't have anticipated. Yesterday, in the crisis of rescue, she hadn't had time to fully register the profound vulnerability of this tiny life. Now, cradling him carefully while Raj adjusted a small heating pad beneath her hands to keep the kitten warm, Jamie felt an overwhelming wave of protectiveness wash over her. Chance's skeletal body, covered in soft black and white fur, weighed no more than a deck of cards, his entire being small enough to fit comfortably in her cupped palms. "Talk to him," Raj encouraged as he showed Jamie how to present the syringe to the kitten's mouth. "They respond to voices, especially higher pitches." Feeling slightly self-conscious but determined to help, Jamie began speaking softly to Chance, a stream of gentle encouragement, as Raj guided her through the feeding process. To their mutual surprise and delight, the kitten responded almost immediately, his tiny pink mouth working against the syringe tip, actually swallowing small amounts of the life-sustaining formula. "That's amazing!" Raj exclaimed, his professional demeanor momentarily giving way to genuine excitement. "He's actually eating for you. We've been trying to get him to take formula since early this morning." He watched as Chance continued to accept small amounts of nourishment from the syringe Jamie held, his little throat visibly working with each swallow. "Sometimes they just need the right person," Raj added thoughtfully, making notes on the kitten's chart as the successful feeding continued. The impact of this small victory radiated through Jamie like sunlight. Chance was fighting, was actively participating in his own recovery, and somehow, improbably, he had chosen to take this significant step forward in her hands. Dr. Patel, passing through the ICU on her rounds, paused to observe the scene, her expression shifting from professional assessment to something warmer as she watched the intense focus with which Jamie administered the feeding under Raj's guidance. "Well, look at that," the veterinarian commented, approaching to check Chance's chart. "He's taken more formula in the past 10 minutes than in all our previous attempts combined." She glanced at Jamie with newfound consideration. "Would you be interested in coming back for his next scheduled feeding? Consistency can be very helpful in cases like this, and he's clearly responding well to you." The invitation was presented as beneficial for the kitten, but Jamie recognized it for what it also was: recognition of the unusual connection that seemed to be forming between rescuer and rescued. Jamie returned to the clinic every 4 hours over the next 2 days, structuring her work schedule and sacrificing sleep to participate in Chance's critical feedings. Each visit brought small but significant signs of improvement: more formula consumed, stronger movements, longer periods of alertness with those striking blue eyes open and increasingly focused. By the 3rd day, Chance was actively responding to Jamie's voice, turning his tiny head toward her when she spoke, his miniature paws occasionally kneading the air in that instinctive behavior of nursing kittens. Dr. Patel found Jamie during the morning feeding on day 4, her expression more relaxed than it had been since Chance's admission. "I think we've turned a corner," she announced, reviewing the latest set of vitals and observations. "His lungs are clearing, he's maintaining hydration, and the lab results show his kidney and liver functions are normalizing. If this trajectory continues, we can consider moving him out of intensive care within the next day or 2. The news brought tears to Jamie's eyes as she cradled the feeding kitten, who seemed blissfully unaware of the medical milestone he had just achieved. The official conversation happened later that afternoon when Jamie arrived for the 2 o'clock feeding. Dr. Patel invited her into the small office adjacent to the examination rooms, an unusual departure from their normal interactions in the ICU. "I wanted to discuss Chance's next steps," the veterinarian began, her tone carefully neutral. "As I mentioned earlier, protocol would typically have us transfer him to animal control once he's stable, where he'd enter the foster system until he's old enough for adoption." Jamie's heart sank at the reminder of the standard procedure, though she had been preparing herself for this eventuality since the first day. She was so focused on maintaining her composure that she almost missed Dr. Patel's next words. "However, given the exceptional circumstances of his case and the unique bond that seems to have formed between you two, I wonder if you might consider an alternative arrangement." The veterinarian leaned forward slightly, her professional demeanor softening. "Would you be interested in fostering Chance yourself during his recovery?" The question hung in the air between them, though Jamie's answer was immediate and instinctive. Yes. She didn't need to consider the practical implications, the adjustments to her schedule, or the responsibilities that would come with caring for such a vulnerable creature. In the space of 4 days, the tiny kitten had carved out a place in her heart that defied logical explanation. Dr. Patel smiled, unsurprised by the quick response, and slid a folder across her desk containing foster care paperwork and detailed instructions for Chance's ongoing care. "He'll need around-the-clock monitoring for at least another week," Dr. Patel explained, as Jamie scanned the documents. "Feedings every 4 hours, medication twice daily, and careful observation for any signs of respiratory distress or infection." She paused, assessing Jamie's focused expression. It's a significant commitment, essentially like caring for a newborn. Are you sure you can manage this alongside your work responsibilities? Jamie nodded without hesitation, already mentally reorganizing her upcoming deadlines and making plans to work from home as much as possible. 2 days later, after Chance had demonstrated consistent improvement and passed all the medical thresholds Dr. Patel had established for release, Jamie found herself carrying a small cat carrier out of the veterinary clinic. Inside, nestled in a soft blanket, Chance rested peacefully, still attached to no medical equipment but strikingly small and fragile. The clinic staff gathered to say goodbye to their miraculous patient, many of them sneaking final peeks into the carrier and offering encouragement to both the kitten and his new foster mother. Jamie had spent the intervening days transforming a corner of her living room into a recovery space for Chance. A large dog crate lined with soft bedding housed a heating pad set to the exact temperature recommended by Dr. Patel, surrounded by the specialized formula, feeding syringes, medication, and digital thermometer she would need for his care. Her dining table had become a makeshift workstation, allowing her to maintain constant supervision while still managing her professional responsibilities through a hastily arranged work-from-home agreement with her understanding supervisor. The first night at home marked both a milestone and a new challenge. Without the safety net of the veterinary clinic's monitoring equipment and experienced staff, Jamie felt the full weight of responsibility for Chance's continued survival. She set alarms for his midnight and 4 a.m. feedings, waking from light, fitful sleep to administer formula and medication with trembling hands, terrified of making a mistake that might compromise his fragile recovery. But Chance seemed to thrive in the quieter environment, taking his formula eagerly and curling trustingly in Jamie's palm after each feeding. Day by day, Chance grew stronger, his transformation unfolding like a small miracle in Jamie's living room. The skeletal frame began to fill out with proper nutrition, revealing the proportions of what promised to be a handsome cat. His blue kitten eyes gradually shifted to a striking amber, and his once sparse fur grew thicker and more lustrous, the distinctive black and white pattern that had been barely discernible in his emaciated state, now emerging as elegant tuxedo markings. Most remarkable was his personality. Despite the trauma of his early weeks, Chance showed no fear of humans, greeting Jamie with enthusiastic purrs and increasingly playful antics. As the scheduled end of the 4-week foster period approached, Officer Mendez called with an update on the investigation. Despite reviewing surveillance footage from businesses near the bayou and following up on several tips, they had been unable to identify who had sealed Chance in the bottle and thrown him into the water. The case would remain open, but with no new leads, it was unlikely they would ever bring the perpetrator to justice. Jamie absorbed this disappointing news while watching Chance, now able to climb and explore his expanded living space, batting enthusiastically at a feather toy suspended from the edge of his enclosure. The following week brought Chance's final checkup at the clinic, where an astonished Dr. Patel pronounced him fully recovered and thriving beyond all expectations. "I've seen a lot of miracle cases in my career," she told Jamie, watching Chance confidently explore the examination room floor, his once wobbly gait now steady and purposeful. "But this one, from the condition he was in when you brought him in, to this healthy, well-adjusted kitten, it's truly remarkable." The unspoken question of what would happen next hung in the air between them. Jamie had been dreading this moment, the official end of her foster commitment, when she would be expected to return Chance to the system for permanent adoption placement. She had rehearsed logical arguments for why she should be allowed to adopt him herself, prepared to cite the unusual circumstances of his rescue and recovery, the bond they had formed, and her proven ability to provide appropriate care. But before she could launch into her prepared speech, Dr. Patel smiled knowingly and produced an adoption form from her folder. "I've already spoken with Animal Control," the veterinarian explained, sliding the paperwork across the table. "Given the exceptional nature of this case, they've agreed to waive the usual waiting period and foster to adopt transition. If you want to make it official, he's yours." Jamie's vision blurred with unexpected tears as she reached for the pen, her signature on the form feeling like the most natural and inevitable conclusion to a journey that had begun with a random glance at a floating bottle on an ordinary Saturday morning. Chance's official adoption was celebrated with a small gathering at Jamie's apartment, attended by Dr. Patel, Raj, Officer Mendez, and several friends who had followed the remarkable rescue story through Jamie's social media updates. The guest of honor, now a healthy 2-pound kitten with boundless energy and confidence, charmed everyone with his playful antics and surprising sociability, showing no traces of the trauma that had nearly claimed his life just 6 weeks earlier. Inspired by Chance's story and the outpouring of support she had received during his recovery, Jamie launched a social media campaign to raise awareness about animal cruelty and the devastating environmental impact of plastic waste in waterways. The local news station that had initially covered Chance's rescue did a follow-up piece showcasing his recovery, which quickly went viral beyond New Orleans, bringing attention to both issues. Jamie's living room wall now featured framed news clippings, alongside photos documenting Chance's remarkable transformation from critically ill foundling to thriving feline companion. The environmental scientist in Jamie couldn't help connecting Chance's ordeal to her professional work. The intersection of human carelessness, environmental pollution, and the innocent creatures caught in between. She channeled this connection into renewed passion for her conservation efforts, developing an educational program for local schools that featured Chance's story as a compelling illustration of how plastic pollution affects wildlife. Students were mesmerized by the now energetic kitten, who accompanied Jamie to presentations, his very existence a powerful testimony to resilience and the impact of compassionate intervention. Chance's journey from discarded victim to beloved pet and community ambassador transformed Jamie as profoundly as it had the kitten himself. The weekly kayaking excursions that had once been solitary retreats now occasionally included a small feline passenger, secured in a custom-made life jacket and perched contentedly at the bow of the kayak, surveying the bayou with curious amber eyes. During these peaceful journeys along the water that had nearly claimed his life, Jamie often reflected on the improbable sequence of events that had brought them together, a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful connections arise from the darkest circumstances. On the 1-year anniversary of Chance's rescue, Jamie sat on her balcony watching the sunset, the now full-grown tuxedo cat lounging contentedly beside her. He had grown into a stunning adult, sleek, confident, and surprisingly large, with no physical evidence of his traumatic beginnings. Only a slight tendency to avoid enclosed spaces and an unusual fascination with running water remained as subtle indicators of his past. As twilight deepened over New Orleans, Jamie scratched beneath Chance's chin, eliciting his characteristic rumbling purr, and whispered a quiet thanks to whatever twist of fate had placed her kayak in the path of a floating bottle on that spring morning, forever altering 2 lives in the process. 2 years after that fateful morning on Bayou St. John, Chance had become something of a local celebrity in New Orleans. His Instagram account, managed by Jamie and featuring his daily adventures, as well as educational content about conservation, had garnered over 50,000 followers from around the world. People were drawn not just to his striking tuxedo appearance and playful personality, but to the incredible story of survival that Jamie shared in carefully measured doses, always emphasizing the positive outcome rather than dwelling on the cruelty of his beginnings. The partnership between woman and cat had evolved in ways neither could have anticipated. Chance accompanied Jamie to her office at the Environmental Research Center several days a week, where he had been unofficially designated as the office therapy cat, bringing comfort to stressed colleagues and charming important visitors. His calm, sociable demeanor made him perfect for this role, and the center's director often joked that Chance had secured more funding for their conservation initiatives than any human grant writer on staff. Perhaps most meaningful was the annual Chance's Challenge cleanup event that Jamie had organized along Bayou St. John, which now drew hundreds of volunteers each spring to remove trash and debris from the urban waterway. The most recent cleanup had collected over 2 tons of waste, including hundreds of plastic bottles that might otherwise have ended up in Lake Pontchartrain, or worse, as makeshift coffins for wildlife. Chance himself made an appearance at each event, safely harnessed and supervised, his presence a powerful reminder of what was at stake in the fight against pollution. Officer Mendez had never closed Chance's case file, a fact that touched Jamie deeply. Though the trail had gone cold, the officer still occasionally called with updates on other animal cruelty investigations that had been successfully prosecuted, taking evident satisfaction in describing the penalties imposed on those convicted. These conversations always ended the same way, with Mendez requesting a new photo of Chance, which he added to a collection pinned to his office bulletin board as a reminder of why his often difficult work mattered. The bond between Jamie and Chance transcended the typical pet-owner relationship. In quiet moments, she sometimes marveled at how completely this cat understood her, how he seemed to sense her moods, appearing with gentle headbutts and purrs on difficult days, giving her space when she needed concentration, and providing enthusiastic companionship during her frequent outdoor adventures. It was as if their shared experience of that critical rescue had forged a connection that operated on a deeper level than ordinary human-animal relationships. Dr. Patel remained part of their lives, not just as Chance's veterinarian, but as a friend who often joined Jamie for coffee or a meal when their schedules allowed, she remarked during one such meeting, watching Chance charm a neighboring table at the outdoor cafe where they sat. In all my years of practice, I've never seen a case quite like his. It wasn't just the medical recovery, impressive as that was. It's who he became afterward. No fear, no trauma response, just this extraordinary resilience and joy. She paused, considering the confident cat who bore no psychological scars from his ordeal. It's almost as if he understood he was being given a second chance and decided to make the absolute most of it. The plastic bottle that had nearly become Chance's tomb now sat on a shelf in Jamie's office, preserved as a sobering reminder of how close this vibrant life had come to being extinguished before it had truly begun. Beside it stood a framed before and after photo. On the left, the skeletal, barely alive kitten in the veterinary incubator. On the right, the glossy, bright-eyed adult cat surveying his domain from Jamie's balcony railing. Between these images lay a journey of healing that had touched countless lives beyond just the two primary participants. Sometimes during her kayak outings with Chance securely harnessed at the bow, Jamie found herself scanning the water's surface with particular attention, wondering if another creature might be in distress, needing intervention. She had always considered herself environmentally conscious, but Chance's rescue had transformed abstract concerns into visceral awareness. Each piece of floating debris now represented not just ecological harm, but potential suffering for living beings who had no voice to call for help. On a personal level, Chance had filled a space in Jamie's life she hadn't recognized was empty. Her work had always provided purpose and satisfaction, but the daily rhythms of caring for another being, the quiet companionship of evenings spent with a purring cat curled against her side, had added a dimension of warmth and connection previously missing. Friends remarked on the subtle changes in her, a softening around the edges, more laughter, an increased willingness to prioritize relationships alongside professional ambitions. Perhaps the most profound lesson of Chance's journey was one that Jamie shared frequently in her educational presentations, that compassion in action, the willingness to pause, to notice, to intervene, could literally change the course of a life. One moment of attention on a spring morning had been the difference between tragedy and transformation, not just for a tiny kitten, but for the expanding circle of people touched by his story. In a world often overwhelmed by environmental challenges and human cruelty, Chance stood as a living testament to the power of one person noticing, caring, and taking action at exactly the right moment. A reminder that sometimes, against all odds, rescue arrives just in time.